All right, this is Emily Seal, just here to talk to you about Chapter 1. So if you have your book, you'd open up please to page 3 and we will get this party started. So, why do you have to take speech? Why is it a required course for everybody in every university ever? Well, it has transferable skills. It will go definitely straight into your occupation. Unless you are working by yourself, making something, in a factory line or something, most people want to know that you have communication skills, that you can talk to somebody else, that you can get along with somebody else. And unless, like I said, you're working with the machine, you have to learn some communication skills about how to get along with another person. So, this is Seth Godin. If you've never heard of him, go Google him real quick. He is a businessman, he is an author, and he makes a very good point in his blog post here. Are we creating and leveraging these tools to regurgitate and spit out more noise? Or are we working to build tools and to help others understand the value of distilling and making sense of the information wave surrounding us? What does he mean by information wave? Well, you are living in a time when you can step up to a computer and learn just about anything you want to learn. In some ways, it makes my job almost obsolete. If you wanted to go teach yourself how to speak publicly, and you think that you could do that with just a computer, then by all means, you could just rely on the information that's on the internet, because there is an information wave. There is tons and tons of information out there. You can Google just about anything. But teaching you how to discern information is what I'm interested in. Half of the information that's out there is written by speculative sources. If someone tells you how to perform surgery, and they don't have a doctorate degree, there's a good chance that they're not actually telling you how to do something that they know anything about. If you would like to freak yourself out, by all means, get on the internet and Google your own health, and they will tell you, inevitably that you have cancer or something, even though they're not professionals. So, another thing that I'd really like for you to learn is how to organize and distill information. Say it simply, understand it fully, and say it simply. So, we'll talk a lot about organization in this class and being concise. So, I want you to think of these three professions, for example. Pretend that you're in business, right? And you're asked to run a board meeting. Well, that is public speaking in a sense. Pretend that you are in education. Forget that you would be public speaking all day, but how do you relate to the parents when they come to you with their own concerns? What breakdowns happen in medicine between nurses and doctors? That has been the speculation of communication experts for quite a long time, especially because doctors used to be primarily men and nurses were primarily women. There were a lot of unwritten rules about what nurses could say to doctors, and what was overstepping some boundaries, and often to the neglect of the patient, right? Now that hopefully we live in a more egalitarian society, the patient doesn't suffer from these unwritten rules between doctors and nurses and how they're allowed to talk to each other. So, your communication at work is going to be monumental in you keeping and getting a job. So, as we talk about how to speak publicly, please don't just see this class as jumping through some hoops. Really try to apply yourself. How can I get better at talking in public? How can I get better at communicating and saying what I mean so that my business, my school, my hospital doesn't suffer from my lack of communication skills? Another important aspect of public speaking is government, right? When we think of as the founder of the theories around around public speaking often go back to 500 BC, where we have Aristotle and Plato. Of course, public speaking has been happening way before then, but this is the first time that we have people really write things down about public speaking. And there were entire schools dedicated to public speaking because you had to defend yourself in court. You didn't hire a lawyer, you were the one to speak, and so it was important that everyone could speak publicly. Even famous books like Poetics by Aristotle, those were written down by someone in the audience. Those were initially public addresses. And so, for the good of our democracy, we need to maintain open communication, especially between politicians and the people listening. And it has always been the foundation of democracy. And even if now it's through a webcam or through a cable modem, we still need to have that sense of people accounting for the changes that they're making. And then perhaps more desperately, we need listeners. We need an audience. We need people actually to pay attention to our government system and keep everybody in check. So back then, people would argue in public and create policy out of that. Whoever won the argument would sort of be entitled to create the policy. And if you look at something as important as our presidential debates, they still theoretically happen this way, in a sense that there's an argument in public with a group of onlookers to sort of surmise what is the truth and how can we get at the truth. And many people believe one of the ways is to have conversations that other people can observe. This doesn't just refer to the President of the United States. This also applies to everyone who has a voice and a sense of justice. Everyone should have the right to speak out. You don't know tomorrow what injustice you may be involved in and how you could then bring about change through the art of public speaking. I'm reminded when I lived in Mississippi, there was a child hit by a bus, and it was because the bus regulations had become lax, of people going around the bus instead of stopping and waiting while a school bus unloaded the children. And that mother of that child created great change just through her ability to speak publicly, just through her ability to speak out about the injustice of that situation. And she probably saved we don't know, hundreds of lives through reinforcing an important policy. So you never know when you might be the next person who needs to speak in public in order to help our public as a group. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the communication process. First, I just feel like I have to have a disclaimer. I think that the title of our book, Mastering Public Speaking, it just sounds like we're conquistadors or something. We're going to, trample over all our problems. And it makes me a little bit nervous because I still get nervous when I speak publicly. I still feel frustrated daily with the creating words and forming my words. And I just truly believe that communication is cursed. Every world religion has had monks who go into solitude and take a vow of silence and prefer to listen to God rather than to listen to men, because there's just a certain amount of frustration that comes in trying to say what we mean. I really like this Nietzsche quote, that for which we find words is something already dead in our hearts. There is always a kind of contempt in the act of speaking. And I think that's very true. When it's in our brain and when we imagine how that conversation's going to go, it feels so much more alive. But then when we have to come down into our world and have that realistic conversation, sometimes it doesn't always go the way we planned. Sometimes we're nervous and we don't say what we mean, or, it was a drunk dial at 4 in the morning and everything came out wrong, or they didn't react the way you hoped they would react. So there's a certain frustration that comes with communication. I'm often reminded of my little nephew and my sister. He's 2 years old and he'll point at the refrigerator and grunt, and she'll say, "Use your words," and then he'll sort of harumph at her in frustration, because it is frustrating to use your words, and it's much easier just to physically act than to have to be sophisticated enough to form your words. And it's worth mentioning that children really think more about body language in general. Greeting cards, I think, are one of our funniest customs. You know, it's Valentine's Day. I've been with my husband for 5 years. We see each other on a daily basis. We sleep in the same bed. He knows me intimately, and yet the only thing I can do is buy him a card for 4.75 that says roses are red and violets are blue, and here this is just, it's so inadequate to express the deep love that we have for each other. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And this dates back even to the Renaissance kings, right? They just hire Christopher Marlowe or William Shakespeare to write the 12-line sonnet rather than trying to come up with the words yourself, because mastering words or mastering public speaking is easier said than done. Oh, that was funny. All right, so I want you to look at these symbols, right? We're going to talk a little bit about symbols. So what does this one make you think of? If you have a scratch piece of paper, just write it down real quick. What does it make you think of? How about this one? What does it remind you of? What connotations? What about that? What does it make you think of? The skull and crossbones there, what does it make you think of? Last one, that symbol. Good, so let's just go through these real quick and talk about connotation. So some of you, when you see this smiley face, you think of the 70s, maybe the Forrest Gump movie. Some of you think of Joe Boxer or Walmart, right? This symbol, you might think of checking something off your chore list, or a government issued survey where you have to check yes or no. This is the Om, right, in the Hindu tradition, but some people might think of Aladdin or Sanskrit, or something foreign or something unfamiliar. And this is a trend of getting this tattooed on your body, which deeply offends some Hindu people, because this is a sacred symbol in their culture. But it sure is pretty. It kind of looks like a 30, doesn't it? But for some religions, these symbols are very meaningful. So this skull and crossbones, some of you think of Pirates of the Caribbean. Some of you who are parents think of the hazardous poison sign that might be on the side of a bottle of bleach telling you not to let your child drink it. Some of you might think of motorcycle gangs or Ed Hardy or punk rock. Last symbol is the Star of David, which is correlated to Judaism and become the symbol for Judaism. But for me, when I see this symbol, it often reminds me of the Holocaust. I had a roommate who was Jewish, and she wore this necklace, and every time I saw it, I would have flashbacks from Schindler's Lists. So these are the most rudimentary type of symbols, right? Markings in black on a white page. But we all have our own connotations, right? Maybe for you, the smiley face reminds you of junior high, or to you, the Star of David reminds you of a pentagram, even though it's got 6 sides, maybe it reminds you of the 5-sided star. So each of us has a connotation, each of us has an opinion, each of us has our own personal history. And as we talk about symbols, it's important for you to remember that. Now, a symbol, here we can see the most rudimentary type of symbol, but a symbol can be anything. A symbol can be the way you wear your hair. A symbol can be the colors that you have on, anything that communicates a message to another person. And then, of course, symbols are also words. Words can represent symbols. So we always want to think about how we're communicating to other people. One of the best examples I can think of this is tattoos, right? To someone of my father's generation, a person with a tattoo could be seen as rebellious or scandalous or involved in some sort of illegal activity. But often for many people of a younger generation, that symbol doesn't mean anything. It might just mean that you are, daring or dangerous or like to have fun. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are threatening to murder anybody or anything. So symbols come in all shapes and sizes, but it's important to remember that people have connotations. So when we talk about the interpreter, as the person looking at those pictures you just saw, you would be considered the interpreter. And then the referent is your opinion of the object or idea. So, whatever you attach to the Star of David, whatever you think about the skull and crossbones, that is your interpretation of the symbol. And so it's important to remember as you choose your words that some words have important reference for some people. And so you want to go out of your way to find the right words or to keep from offending. And let's talk about some ways to do that. Symbols are emotional. I If I ever lost my wedding ring, it would not necessarily be that I missed the diamond, but it would be that I had lost an heirloom or lost something that I felt like was important to me emotionally because of my attachment to my husband. Some of you are hoarders for many of the same reasons. Right, a few years ago, a pastor down in Florida burned the Quran, and it was very, very offensive to many people. And so many of the media sources said, so what? So what? Well, the Quran is a symbol of someone's faith, and it has even more severe connotations in certain religions, right? Even the depiction of Muhammad for Muslims is highly, highly offensive. And this is the reason that Protestant church broke off from the Catholic in many ways, because the Catholic Church was into symbols and creating statues, and the Protestants said that it was dangerous to create a symbol to represent God, that was a form of idol worship. So symbols are emotional, symbols are meaningful, and someone has a emotional reaction to a word you use. That's not always illogical. One of my infamous examples of this is the comedian Sarah Silverman. She came into the TED conference and did her stand-up act, which was bad judgment on her part, and she used the word retarded. She said, I want to adopt a retarded baby. Well, as soon as she said that word, half of the audience stood up and walked out, because the word retarded has come to have a connotation of schoolyard bullying, someone calling somebody else a retard. But it didn't used to have that connotation. I have a friend, and her diploma says on it, she is a specialist in mental retardation. And it didn't have that connotation a few years ago. So it's important to remember that words go in and out of context culturally. For example, the Motlow speech at graduation was a circuit judge, and she kept using the word winning, winning, and it was right in the middle of this Charlie Sheen scandal where Charlie Sheen had declared himself a winner for sleeping with prostitutes and snorting a lot of drugs. And so there was quite a few snickers in the audience because that circuit judge did not understand the connotation with which she spoke. And this is perhaps one of the most powerful words we still have in the Western world, and it is an emotional word. And when people say it, it is scandalous, especially if you're not of African American descent. You must try to ensure that the message your audience hears matches as closely as possible to the message you intended. We can't take it for granted that people will understand what we mean, because it's just not the truth. We live in a world full of confusion, right? Many, many world religions have mystic reasons for this. Maybe it was the Tower of Babel. Maybe it was because of the sun god. There are many explanations for why it is, but many accept that it is, in a sense, cursed. What connotations are you evoking when you speak? And how do you get around that? Well, one of the best ways is to expand your vocabulary. Find those words that mean exactly what you mean for them to mean. And avoid jargon. Avoid words that we don't understand. So if I walk into your class on sports, on football, I am exceedingly ignorant when it comes to football. So if you start talking about the linebacker and I don't even know enough about football to fake ignorance here. The linebacker or the infield, that's baseball. Anyway, you know what I mean. If you start using a lot of jargon around football, you're going to completely lose me. So first, define that term for me, but then feel free to use that term in your speech because it means something very, very specific. So going back to the analogy about your job, if you do not use those really good specifics, you could lead to a lot of misunderstandings. If you are a nurse talking to a doctor and the doctor prescribes a drug that sounds very similar to another drug, right? Or you can't read his handwriting. You could kill a person just by your misunderstanding of the doctor's orders. So we always want to make sure that we are mastering our language in as much as possible, using those words that don't have connotations. And it happens, jargon is used in so many circles, in business and religion. We just always want to make sure that we're striving to be understood. Politics. Politics is one of the worst areas to have jargon. So if you don't understand what words are, take the time to look them up, because they are the only tools we have besides body language in being understood. One thing I'll go back to in my class is the importance of feedback. If you look out into an audience like this and you are still talking, you're just plowing on with your speech, then you're not doing anyone any good, because nobody's listening, right? And you may have practiced that speech and imagined in your head that this was how the speech was going to go, and you were going to say every word, word for word, but people aren't paying attention. Then you need to stop and back that train up, right? You need to stop and think about, how can I draw these people back in? How can I actually communicate with them? Because communication only happens with an audience. If you're talking to yourself, then that's not considered. That's considered intrapersonal, not public speaking. The thing I want you to ask anytime you're public speaking in my class is, am I teaching or am I talking? Am I teaching or am I talking? Is the message that I'm sending out into my audience actually being received? Or can I tell that they're confused or dazed or bored? If they are checked out emotionally, then you are talking. You're not teaching. If they're actually receiving the information, then you're successfully communicating. And some people ignorantly think that the entire bulk of the responsibility is on the audience to become interested, to discipline their mind. And it is true that the primary responsibility is to the audience, but there is a certain amount of responsibility that goes to the speaker. And as long as you're in my class, I'm going to challenge you to be teacher, not a talker. So how can we tell when we're talking or teaching? Feedback is primarily in the form of body language when we're dealing in a public communication setting. So, do people, are they looking at you like they're bored? Do they have their head on their desk? Can you tell that they're starting to get confused by their mouth being agape and their brow being knit? So just watch their faces, and if you see someone starting to tune out, just one person, you can close proximity to them, right? So we call that speaking extempore, to be able to speak off the top of your head. And you have a plan. I'm not saying you should not plan out your speech, but I will never allow you to read a speech in my class, because if you're reading, you're not accounting for feedback. You're not trying to wake up your audience, or you're not trying to calm down your audience based on the energy that they're sending your way. So always in my class, you should have a few note cards, refer to your notes, and have generally planned out what you're going to say, but you should be responding to the nonverbal cues you're getting from your audience. So I have some people who go too far off course. In an effort to try to bring back their audience, they can go off on a long rant. And I'm not saying that you should do that, but I do think that you shouldn't be so married to your idea of how this speech was going to go that you plow forward with the plan even if nobody is understanding what you're saying. What I was hinting at earlier is proximity. If you see one or two people starting to tune out, you can close proximity to them. Take a couple steps towards them. Make eye contact with that person who looks bored. And often that will perk them back up into listening. The other thing that I'm going to challenge you to do is energy matching. If you're in an 8 o'clock class and you walk in to speak to that class and they're all really, really tired, sometimes you can actually bother them if you're too energetic. Now, you can challenge them to be a little bit more energetic, but if you completely go in an opposite direction, sometimes you can lose them because it becomes an us versus them. And this is a sales technique, and some of the worst salesmen you have do not account for the listening element. They don't account for energy of their audience. Somebody is having a bad day, they walk up to a salesman, and the salesman says, "Hey, how you doing? Let me tell you something." And the energy of the person being sold to is much more Eeyore, sad, calm, then that energy matching can't happen. And they have completely lost their Eeyore customer there because they have not accounted for the other person and listened to the other person. In essence, what I'm saying is that public speaking is not just a one-way street. It should be. A good public speaker listens to their audience and then reacts to them. So there are a lot of things to think about. I want you to imagine that you have been asked to speak at a juvenile detention center. So someone just called you and said, "Okay, you're in college. We're so proud of you. We'd like you to come back to the juvenile detention center and challenge these students. Tell them that they can do college too if they put their mind to it." So the thing that I'm asking you here is, what would you ask? What are some questions that you should ask the person on the other side of the phone? Right? Maybe you should ask, how many people am I speaking for? Right? Is this all boys or all girls? How old are the people in the juvenile detention center? Am I going to have a PowerPoint presentation? Or are they going to be sitting in chairs? Are they going to be sitting in desks? Do you start to get to see how many environment questions we have going on here? Will it be a quiet place? Or is this a busy part in the center of the detention center? So, what are the places that I'm going to speak? Luckily for you in our course, you have a pretty predictable environment, although right now they're doing construction on Motlow campus, so it's sort of noisy sometimes with the blasting and jackhammering and such, but in general you have a pretty predictable environment with which to teach in. So, and every environment has its distractions, whether it be the air conditioning unit or the hum of the phone that somebody forgot to turn off, it's on vibrate. There's tons of just little environment to distractions, and a good public speaker can overcome those. So we're just talking about physical noise in the space. Like I said, the jackhammering if you're in the city, the crickets if you're in the country, there is physical noise in our environment. But then there's also physiological for your listener, right? They might have hunger pangs, or they might have a headache, right? In their body, there may be some distraction from the message they're trying to hear. The last kind of noise I want to talk about is psychological, and this is perhaps the biggest obstacle for most of us, right? We're busy thinking about us having to give a speech next, or busy thinking about whether or not we're okay with our significant other, or whether we're fighting. We have these psychological distractions and worries and fears and frustrations that are going through our heads. So there's all kinds of noise that you're battling with when you are talking to an audience, or different things that you're competing with. So you just need to be aware of that and know that for every occasion there will be different distractions. If you're speaking at a formal dinner, then you'll have people clanging their glasses. If you're speaking outside, you'll have someone drive by on their bike. There are always going to be distractions, and you need to anticipate those. And usually what I'm going to tell you is acknowledge them. Right? Don't just pretend like they didn't happen. Wave to the guy on the bike. And that omission, that admission that the other person is there and is real will often bring your audience back to you. It's when you try to ignore it that sometimes it becomes overwhelming. The last thing that we want to talk today is on page 15. We have some critical thinking skills, and some of you will be really, really good at organization, and others of you will be better at remembering things. And there are ways for you to accommodate for this, but overall we're hoping that all of these skills on page 15 are things that you can become better at. Some of you, it'll take you a long time to come up with a topic for your speech, and that's called generating. And the more that you do it, hopefully the better you will become at generating. But it is all critical thinking skills that I expect you to have, right? That I expect you to form and continue to work on. So Personally, I'm not as good as organization, right? I tend to be pretty good at generating in the creative side of my brain, but actually following through and keeping everything organized is a little bit more difficult for me. So we each have our strengths and weaknesses, but we all need to work on all of those skills, which once again just speaks to how difficult public speaking can be in that you're balancing all of these different skills. And many different education gurus like Robert Marzano that they mention here discuss how critical thinking skills are really the important thing to learn in college, going deeper, right? Not just being able to fill out a multiple choice test, but being able to problem solve, put it into your own words, find the solutions to our world problems. And I'm really hoping that by the time you finish my class, you will be an even better problem solver than you were before. So that's chapter 1. If you will go back and read over the chapter and take that quiz, I will see you in chapter 2.